Welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. And I'm going to deal today with three areas uh, that divide Black people in particular: class, sex, and race. It's interesting that the authorities, the people in control, they don't have a problem with talking about race, and they're happy to talk about sexual identity and gender. They're happy to talk about patriotism. They're happy to talk about religion. They're happy to talk about immigration. They're happy to talk about abortion. They're not happy to talk about class. Race, gender, religion, abortion, immigration, gun control, culture, and patriotism. These are issues that are used to divide people, to turn neighbor against neighbor, to fuel hatreds and antagonisms. But class, they want to leave that alone. I want to show you how deep it is right in our face. At one time it was considered that there were three basic classes: upper class, middle class, and lower class. But you very seldom hear the term lower class anymore. Nobody wants to be lower class. But now, in the meantime, they've also included something called upper middle class, lower middle class, and working class. The thing about working class is that working class has taken the space of lower class. You see, because what is working class? Let's talk about that for a minute, because um, the purpose of looking at these different areas is so you can figure out for yourself, number one, who you are, where you are in all of this, and whether or not you whether or not you are one of the people who finds themselves using these different things to be divided from other Black people. Okay, for an example, if you consider yourself to be upper middle class, how much does that divide you from the working class, or from the middle class or the lower middle class, and especially from the lower class? And if you are lower middle class, for an example, does that mean that you're trying to get to upper middle class, or are you trying to get to upper class? Hmm. Class is a very, very dangerous thing, because it divides us, but even more, for many of us, it defines us. So let's look for a minute at these different classes. The working class is also considered the working class poor. Um, Now, what is the working class? Well, the lower class is the working class. Okay, that's just reality. The lower class is generally thought to consist of people who work but don't make much money. And it also is supposed to include people who depend on government assistance to make ends meet. Um, Household income less than $20,000 a year is considered below or near poverty level. Well, it's that's definitely below poverty level. Uh, in fact, let's look at that. Let's say that a family income is $20,000. Divide that by 12. What is that? About $1,500 a month, somewhere like that. which divide that by four, is less than $400 a week. Yeah, that's bad. Now, if you pay rent of, I don't know, $900 a month, and you only make 1,500, woo, because the idea is supposed to be, this is what it's supposed to be, supposedly, okay? That you're only supposed to pay about 30% of your income, monthly income should go to rent or mortgage. But if you make $1,500 a month and your rent is $700, that's close to 50%. So in order to pay 30% of 1,500, that means you got to pay rent of $500. You can't find nothing for $500 a month. You can't find nothing, no apartments in no city I know of. And even if let's say if the rent was 500, when you count the utilities and all of that, bam, you're done. So lower class is Poe. Um, Now, what income is considered working class? Working class, because that's basically lower class. Members of the working class rely on their income exclusively upon their earnings from wage labor. In other words, what they make from their job, that's their income. Um, Now, here's the sad thing. Based on that, most of the people in this country would be considered working class because the majority of people depend on their check for their income. Now, people may, and a lot of people do, they might work a little extra something on the side, got a side hustle, whatever. More and more people are working two jobs trying to make ends meet, and they still don't meet, right? So, majority of people, especially people who live in urban areas, uh, are making a check, and that's their income. Okay. Wow, that's bad. So the social group that has the lowest status, the working class, is also nowadays considered the lower class. And if you look at it, how they live, now their income would be $20,000 to $45,000 is considered low income. Think about that. $20,000 to $45,000 a year is considered low income. Well, when you look at black people, we kind of think that is being middle class. We do. Because so many of us don't make a lot of money. We don't make much money at all comparatively. When we look around the world, um, well, let's look at Africa for a minute. Okay. In Africa, they've got a growing middle class. Okay. Oh, here's another graph. That's a good one. Middle income range 14,000 or 34,000 to 102. We be rich. Okay, but you see that South Africa is the largest middle class. Nigeria, and remember, Nigeria is the most populous. Nigeria has the largest population of any country in Africa. Okay, we'll come back to these graphs a little bit later, but I just want to give you an idea that there's something called middle class in most industrialized countries, even in Africa. It might not be what we want it to be. Middle class is considered to be the social group between the upper and the working classes, including professional and business people and their families. Okay? Um, Now, this is what most of us consider ourselves to be middle class because, people don't want to consider themselves to be lower class. And we have a lot of us that we have jobs, we have to wear a suit and tie, whatever, and we consider those jobs to making us middle class. But now, here's the income structure for middle class, supposedly making 45,000 to 139, basically $140,000 a year, from 45 to 140,000. Now that means you can be at the lower end at 45,000 and be considered middle class. You might live in a house like these that like the one that's showing here. It generally means you're buying a home, you got a car, you get to take vacations, and you're working towards retirement. Okay? The middle class. And you got upper, middle, and middle class. We'll talk about that more. But isn't that a nice little house, middle class house, grass and white picket fence? So there are a lot of people who believe that they are middle class. Um, Now, there's other studies that say the middle class income range is actually from 34,000 to 75,000. Okay, look at how much you make. Okay, middle class tends to work for someone else. They have a job, they have a career. See, that's one of the differences, right? Working class, they're considered to just have a job. In many cases, their job is dispensable. Whereas if you're middle class, you have a career, but they do still work for somebody else. Um, Upper middle class tends to be self-employed in that they own a job. They might own a store or have some kind of business. Okay. Um, Now the rich, the upper class, they tend to own manufacturing and big businesses. Okay. They own the corporate ladder that the middle class is trying to work his way up on. Okay. The upper middle class is consistent basically of white collar professionals who not only have above average personal income and advanced educational degrees, but also they tend to have a higher degree of autonomy in their work. The main occupational tasks of upper middle class individuals tend to be around consulting and instruction and conceptualizing and blah blah blah. All right, let me see. Let's look at some upper middle class lifestyle things. Okay, upper middle class. You got some stuff. Tend to have more expensive cars, better homes. Okay, take better vacations, live in better neighborhoods, and so your life is considered to be much more stable if you're upper middle class. Upper middle class, generally you make $140,000 to 150,000. The range is not that big because you only got maybe 2%, 2 to 5% of the people in the United States at least are considered to be upper middle class. Yeah. How many people do you know who make $150,000 a year? Yeah. hmm Nicer house, right? Very nice house there. Although the grass is crooked. um, Yeah, got a chandelier in the bedroom and all of that stuff. Yeah, that's upper middle class. All right, let's take a look at upper class. That's considered like the one top 1%. In the upper class income is more than $300,000 a year. Okay, if your family income is more than 300 grand a year, then yeah, you're considered upper class. Look at that house. That's a little island. Now, that's upper class when you got an estate, right? You got a compound and stuff. Now that's a nice car. Of course, that means you got a driver. um, yeah, that's upper class when you got all them cars and garages for them, right? Upper class. That's upper class at some kind of dinner. Some people they love the fact that they can go to stuff like that and say, "I rub shoulders with the rich." It's another house of the rich. Ooh, nice, huh? So if we understand it, then we understand that there's a difference in the classes, and the classes are defined by how well you live or how unwell you live. And we as black people, I know you found yourself on one of those levels that I just went through. Okay? You don't have to tell me, it doesn't matter. What matters is whether or not we can reach to each other through those classes. But in general that doesn't happen. It's like if I get to upper middle class, I don't know y'all no more. In fact, if I get to quote real middle class, I don't know none of y'all in the working class no more. And especially I don't know any of y'all in the lower class. But here's the challenge. As black people, most of the time, only one of us in the family, in the one of our sisters or brothers or cousins, generally only one of us will get to um, upper middle class. Maybe one of us. Most of us, or many of us, if we get to go to college and all of that, we might aspire to middle class, and some of us might make the money that would ordinarily mean we could be middle class. But here's what happens: we end up having to support our family members who are, quote, in the lower class, whose ends don't meet. In some cases, it might be our parents. We might end up having to take care of our parents, and some of our income goes towards that or goes towards other members of our family. So we don't get to use the the income of middle class to support our middle class. That's what is the trick in the game. You see? So, and what we tend to find is that if one of the family members gets to upper middle class, they usually cut off everybody because they can't afford to take care of y'all and keep their upper middle class status. That's why they move away. Get out, get out, get out. Okay? So let's understand what class does. Classism. All right, I'm going to move to the next one, next area, because this one, and again, I want to be very clear. I am not making a judgment here. What I'm dealing with is how these areas affect us in terms of dividing us. Okay? Let's talk about sex. Sex is a label, male or female in general, that you're assigned at birth by a doctor at birth based on the genitals you're born with and the chromosomes you have. It goes on your birth certificate. Now, gender is much more complex. It's a social and legal status, and it's also a set of expectations from society about behaviors, characteristics, and thoughts. Among humans, males generally or typically carry an X and a Y chromosome, whereas females usually carry two X chromosomes. Okay? Now, this is important to understand, is that for the longest time, that's been the general rule. You either had an XY or XX. If you had XY, you were considered to be male. If you had XY, if you had XX, you were generally considered to be female. And that meant that you did female things and all the way through. Now, here's why I say it's one of the things that is causing division among black people. You had something come into the picture called first sexual orientation. And that's, of course, generally meant whether you were um, homosexual or heterosexual. Then you had something jump into the picture called gender. This is causing a lot of confusion and division among a lot of folks, but especially among black people, because we basically like to keep it simple. And I want to be clear here that there's going to be folks that's going to say, well, um, homosexuality has been always been a part of society. Here's how I'm going to deal with it here, though. I believe that there's probably been homosexuality in all societies going back forever. But because it's there does not mean that it had a lifestyle. Okay? The idea that homosexuality is a lifestyle is relatively new. So, for an example, you can have a child who is not yet engaging in sexual activity that supposedly says, well, I'm a homosexual, or I'm gay, I'm lesbian. Well, reality is if you're not engaging in sex with the same sex person, you're not gay, you're not a homosexual. However, once we have a lifestyle established that says, okay, you can have a lifestyle, a gay lifestyle, lesbian lifestyle, then anybody can be whatever they want. And so what we have grown into is a mixture of genders, um, and so now you have what's called transgenders. See, they used to be when I was growing up, and in a way that this is why it can be very confusing and dividing. When I was growing up, you had men, you had women, and you had people who were homosexual. They went about their business. There wasn't this thing that, well, you came out and then you want everybody to applaud you. Uh, it's like the idea of gay pride. Proud, pride is something. To be proud of something is an accomplishment. You accomplish something. But being gay is not an accomplishment. But you have gay pride, gay pride week, gay pride month, whatever. It's this idea that what your sexuality is or your sexual preference should be applauded, recognized and applauded. That's up to you. But the reality is that what you do in the privacy of your bedroom should be your private business between you and that other person. Now, what is gender? And that's very confusing, especially to older people like me. Gender has to do with your how you see yourself. Um, hmm, it's different from your sexual orientation, and it's different from your biological sex. So you can have an XY chromosome, which would identify you as male, but you may present as female. What you're seeing right there, phenomenal woman, that's a transgender person, meaning that they were born as a male, but they present as a female, or they might even present as what they call it, non-binary, meaning that they don't identify as either male or female. This person right here, Laverne Cox, she's a transgender. RuPaul used to be, as we call it, in fact, she still is. He still is. He's a drag queen. That's he has now come out as being gay, but he's a drag queen. That meant somebody who liked to dress up as opposite sex. What has caused is a lot of confusion about what people are and how they present themselves. For example, one of the raging, um, not debates, but one of the raging issues is if you are a transgender, do you have an obligation to tell people when you're social dating? When do you tell them that you're transgender? For example, if you meet somebody and you go on a date and you're a male presenting as female and you're on a date with a male, do you have an obligation to tell them from the beginning that you are a transgender, that you are male presenting as a female? And the debate is strong because there are some people who are transgenders that say, no, I don't have an obligation to tell them anything. I'm presenting as I am. But there are some people who say, no, that's not right, because if you're presenting as a female, but you are a male in terms of your biological identity, I need to know that because I may not want to date someone who is a transgender. And then you have some transgenders that say, well, that's prejudice, and that, you know, we should be treated as who we present as. This is one of the things that's going through a lot of changes in our society, but particularly among black people, it's very challenging because, again, we're talking about thousands of years where we didn't have an issue with this. Think about it. We've been around for thousands of years in civilizations. We did not have all this difficulty before. In other words, before white people. Um, yes, we may have had people who were um, gay or lesbian, but they did not have a lifestyle. Okay, and that's where the issue is that they are transgenders are fighting for a lifestyle to be recognized. That, in other words, you have men, you have women, and you have transgenders. And some people call it third sex. And see, this is where it really gets weird because let's say somebody considers themselves bisexual. All that really means is that they can choose to be um, with men or women in terms of their sexual practices. But what is their gender? And so then you get into what folks call binary and non-binary. I ain't figured all that stuff out. So again, when I talk about it being the idea that sex, that whole area of sex and gender, is one of the areas that divides us. It's causing division because it is so confusing. And We don't control it. Black people don't control this. Okay? It's being controlled by forces and energies that we are not even privy to. Okay? So you have gender, you have sexuality, you have oh. So, okay, and I know that's causing lots of thought and stuff like that with people who are watching this and listening to this. And again, I'm not judging. I'm simply pointing out that there's a lot of division. I'm not the one to decide whether gay people are gay, being born gay, or any of that. It's up to you to deal with for yourself. But I do know that, in fact, as some of these graphics I put up here will show, that you have people who look like and act like they're female and they're biologically they are male. You have people who and why is it that so many is from male to female, but very, very few go from female to male? Now, in terms of transgenders, especially when it comes to the physiological um, operations, but the idea of being a woman, some women who are female, born female, they resent transgender women because, in their estimation, and I'll give you a good example. Laverne Cox, that person that you see right here, she has been named in awards and different recognitions as, in one, she was considered Woman of the Year. More and more corporate America takes people who are transgender women and places them among biological women as equals. And some biological women say, no, that's not fair. In sports, this is really where it gets deep. In sports, more and more, you have people who are biologically men or male, but they want to compete against females. They say, I'm a transgender and I want to compete as female. And the females say, no, 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 that's not fair. These are things that are being worked out. And like I say, it's causing confusion and it divides us. Okay? The last area, can you talk about confusion? Race. Race. Wow. Um, when you consider this, black people is a skin group based classification used for specific people with a mid to dark brown complexion. Not all black people have dark skin. However, in certain countries, especially in socially based systems of racial classification in the Western world, the term black is used to describe persons who are perceived as dark skinned people. Um, this has become a serious issue of division. See, it didn't used to be an area of division. Look at it this way. In the first 200 years that black people were in the United States with Europeans present, they primarily identified themselves by their specific ethnic group, closely allied with language, and not by the skin color. In other words, you're talking about from what 1619 to 1819. Um, they were still dealing with themselves as Ashanti and Igbo, Bakongo, Wolof. Different. Those are ethnic groups or nations. Okay. However, what the white folks did, what the Europeans did, they combined the groups of people, and the Europeans did not recognize the different ethnic groups. You see, they started mixing us on purpose. And then when they started forcing us not to be able to speak our language, and they started naming us, this is why that process was so important to him. That's why in what Roots, when he beat that boy, beat him till he said the name he gave him, that was so important because it was beating him in order to help that process of confusion and dilution. And then after some generations, you beat it out of us to where we didn't know what tribe we came from, what ethnic group we came from, what area of Africa we came from. And then they started calling us all the same thing, niggers. Okay? That's I'm just talking about what occurred. So that whether you were in the northern United States or the southern United States, if you were in the Caribbean, we were just all niggers. Um, Now some of us kept an African perspective. That's why you had the African Methodist Church. You had certain organizations that kept Africa in the name, but they kept fighting us and beating us down about this. Kept trying to make us be one group of people, niggers. Now, in the last, I don't know, let's see, you had some of us that began to use the term black to identify us as a racial group because, see, we weren't always into this racial thing. That's a social construct, as they like to say. In other words, that's something that Europeans or white people decided to use as a way of dividing us, to define us and then divide us. Um, for an example, in South Africa with apartheid, you had blacks and you had coloreds. Well, how did that come to be? You had some Europeans who decided, based on their criteria, that you were either black or you were colored. You know how they used to do it? One was the pencil test. They took a pencil and put it in your hair, and if the hair was if the pencil would stand up in your hair because your hair was that kinky, you were considered then or labeled black. If your hair was too thin to hold that pencil up, you were considered colored. Why was this important? Because what your designation was determined where you could live and where you could work. So if it broke up families, because you might have a sister, for an example, her hair was kinky, so she would be labeled black. But her brother, whose hair was not kinky enough to hold up the pencil, he was labeled colored. He had to move. He couldn't stay where the black people were. Yeah, they broke up families, they broke up relationships, they broke up all kinds of things based on their criteria of what you were. In fact, they call them kafirs. Okay. Now here in the United States, we call ourselves black, and then it went to a certain period where we were called Negroes, and then we called ourselves Negroes. I know this is personal for a lot of us. When I was growing up, my mother, who had been raised in terms of quote black middle class, she considered herself to be a Negro. Well, I'm a child of the '60s, and so I began to see myself in terms of my African heritage, And so I refused to use the word Negro. And I remember having some little arguments with my mom where she would say things like, boy, you're a Negro, you were born a Negro, you're going to die a Negro. And, I pushed back on that just to show you how life can be, though. Within a few years of having those arguments with my mother, who was a school teacher for 47 years, my mother, like, from different things that occurred, grew to stop using the word Negro, began to call herself Black, became the sponsor of the back then the Afro American History Club, and stopped pressing her hair. Wore her hair natural the rest of her life. So change can happen, right? Um, Now some black folks began using the term African American. Um, Now I went through a period when I used the term African in America to pay attention to my African heritage. Now you have some folks, some black people who they have an aversion to the word black, they have an aversion to African. And so they would fight for I'm just an American. And why that was so weird to us was that, well, wait, you consider yourself just an American? And they'd say things like, well, I'm not African, I'm not in Africa, and I'm not black. And so they would fight to use the term just an American. And that's okay for yourself, but that ain't what that's not how America treats you. Now, understand white folks are busy with this because they started doing what? They started doing things like sowing seeds of division. They would say things like, well, you're not black, you're biracial. You're biracial. Ah. See, back in the day, you were a mulatto. If you had one parent that was white and one parent that was black, you were mulatto if you had a light enough skin color. Okay? And then they changed it from mulatto to biracial. Well, the reality is this a whole bunch of us in the United States are biracial. In the sense, we got some white folks in us through rape. Okay? But by making it biracial became a term that meant you were special. Um, and again, I'm not judging. There's some black people that just refuse to accept people who consider themselves biracial. They don't accept them as being black. They ain't black enough. That was one of the things that's aimed at Barack Obama. They say he ain't black. He biracial. But the reality is that many of us, if we do a DNA test, it shows quite a bit of European up in us. And it's not by choice, but it's to divide us. Because once we start dividing ourselves between biracial and partial racial and kind of racial and black people as opposed to African American and all of this, right? We are divided. And then you have some of us that say things like, well, black people are not a monolith. And so therefore, we shouldn't vote the same. No, that's bull. Because I guarantee you that Jewish people, they vote as a group. Italians, if it's somebody Italian running in a race, they vote for that Italian. Polish, same thing. Irish, same thing. German, same thing. You see, we're the only ones that get told, or no, y'all, if y'all vote the same way together, as a block vote, then y'all being racist. And again, we have folks that we can't even define unless we choose black. You see what I'm saying? If I go around saying, well, your skin color means you're too light to be black, what does that do? You know, we got black folks that we've been accepting as black, but it turns out they might have a white parent. Okay? Um, does that mean they're not black? Again, we're talking about things that divide us. We have to find a way around or how to deal with this. Um, in fact, nowadays you have the issue of what happens if um, somebody is born in South Africa. They're considered to be South African. Now, their heritage might be German, might be British, might be from the Netherlands, and their skin is white, 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 white. Both their parents are white, but they're considered African. And they move to the United States and they get citizenship. Now, are they African American? Well, we've had a few cases of folks that have done just that. They call themselves African Americans, and they're white people. Okay? Now, where they can't do, what they cannot do is say they are black. Okay? And I believe we need to protect that there are black Africans to distinguish themselves from the white people who are claiming that they're Africans. The second, third generation Zimbabweans, they consider the white folks they're of European descent, and they say that they're Africans. Yeah, they say they're Africans, and that's why they say they should be able to keep the land that their great grandparents stole. See, but they can't say that they're black. All over the world, we have black people. And so I say we should define ourselves as black folks. But again, it's a point of division among us. So, in closing, understand what I'm saying here. We're talking about class, sex, and race. Points of division among us. We have to find our ways through this. And as long as we let other people define us and decide for us what we are, who we are, where where we're going, we'll have those divisions because that's what they do. They divide us through class, sex, and race, religion, language. We got a lot of work to do to cut away or cut through the divisiveness to find the ways that we can work together to overcome the racism, to overcome the oppression. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm going to close now. Thank you so much. And as always, I say no justice, no peace, no love, KNOW. By the way, last point there. See those blonde children? They're naturally blonde. Just like you got black people that are naturally blue eyed, because we own all that. So don't let nobody, fight you about race and saying, well, only some people can have it. No, no, that's not true. Okay, I'm gone.